our system, we can get it to work in just about any OBD1 car without much tinkering at all.
Well, what we find is when you get to a situation where the computers are resetting themselves about every 51, 52 miles, the computers are set up where it specifically gets to know the driver and your habits, how your foot is on the gas and so forth. But the one thing we have to do is the hydrogen itself, as it goes in, it's learning a new fuel source, and the fuel source being the same, but it's lighter than the liquid gas. So if it's reading that it's too lean, then actually the computer will say it needs more gas, so it'll try to pump more gas into the chamber, in which then you'll be using more gas. So it's more important then to read and get the correct information and tools to know what your baseline is, and then you can work off of that and see if you need to pump more hydrogen in or less by having a guide tool.
Yeah, there's several different tools that are on the market that probably at a later time we're going to go into some more detail about installing those into your car and how they work. But thanks for that comment. I appreciate that, because it's true. One of the things that you said about the hydroxy gas going in there that's lighter than regular gas, one of the things that we found out is some of the key sensors in your car will detect that hydroxy gas as pure oxygen. And there's three sensors really that we need to talk about, and let me outline those for you. There's the MAP sensor, MAP, which means mass air pressure sensor. There's the MAF, MAF sensor, which means mass air flow. And there's the O2 sensor, which is the oxygen sensor. The MAP sensor is usually in a car, let me put it this way, there's either a MAP or a MAF. Some of the newer cars have both a MAP and a MAF, and they can be very confusing. But what they do is as the air comes into the engine, they detect how much oxygen and airflow is going into the engine. And if for some reason those sensors detect a large amount of oxygen coming into the system, in order to avoid having problems in the combustion cycle, getting too hot and burning the cylinder, they make sure that they have a certain amount of liquid fuel that will offset the oxygen in the system. And then the O2 sensor usually comes on the backside, either on the exhaust manifold or down on the catalytic converter, or both. And in many of the new cars, there's as many as 4, 6, or 8 O2 sensors. Commonly, though, there's only 2. Most commonly on 2 per side. So if you have a V8 or a V6, you could have 4. And then some cars even have some past the muffler that detect what's going out. And typically that detects mostly the temperature of the exhaust as it's going out of the car, and gives the car information telling the car if it's too hot that maybe there's too much air in the system and it needs to enrich the fuel again. So all of these sensors serve to cause your car to force more fuel into the system, regardless of whether it's getting the hydrogen or not. So what we often find is on the older cars that have a little less sophisticated computer system, we can inject the hydrogen and the oxygen in, and we'll get a 20 to 40% increase in gas mileage immediately. But on some of the newer cars, and many of the newer cars, we end up having to do some pretty specific tinkering to kind of help the system understand that it's being assisted with hydrogen and that it doesn't need to enrich the fuel quite so much. And one of the things that we do to achieve that, and Brent can tell about this, is when we're looking for that vacuum line, we have some specific goals. Why don't you describe that?
Well, you want a strong suction into the combustion chamber. On my particular car, there was a little valve that was sticking up that wasn't being used. And We took the cap off of that valve, connect the vacuum line